In the age before the Great Flood, when the world was young and humanity's memory was long, a shadow fell from the heavens. It was a time of giants and heroes, a world so corrupt that God himself chose to wash it clean. But what truly happened in those forgotten centuries? We are told stories of fallen angels, but ancient Sumerian tablets speak of another group, the Anunnaki, the ones who from heaven to earth came. Most will tell you these are two separate stories, one a biblical account of angelic rebellion, the other a pagan myth of sky gods. But what if that separation is a lie? What if the Anunnaki were not strange visitors from another star, but the pagan world's name for the very same sons of God mentioned in Genesis chapter 6? A truth so dangerous, so easily twisted, that ancient scribes chose to bury the connection forever. This is not just a historical riddle. Uncovering this link changes everything we thought we knew about the world before Noah. It reveals the true nature of the first great spiritual war, a war fought not in the heavens, but here, on earth. A war where forbidden knowledge was the weapon, and the purity of mankind's bloodline was the prize. The evidence has been there all along, hidden between the lines of Scripture and sealed away in books they tried to make us forget. If you've ever sensed that parts of the story were missing, that the silence in the Bible's oldest chapters speaks louder than the words, then you are ready to hear this. Join us on this journey as we uncover what was lost. Think for a moment about the book of Genesis, chapter 6. It's one of the most mysterious and unsettling passages in all of Scripture. We read it, we hear sermons on it, but we rarely stop to ask the most obvious question. Why is it so brief? An event so catastrophic that it leads to God flooding the entire world is described in just 4 short verses. It mentions the sons of God and the Nephilim, but offers almost no explanation of who they were or where they came from. This almost never gets mentioned in pulpits, but the silence is deafening. It's as if the original author assumed the reader already knew the entire terrifying backstory, as if the names and deeds of these beings were common knowledge in the ancient world. But what if that knowledge was preserved, not in Hebrew scrolls, but on Sumerian clay tablets, under a different name? What if the identity of the sons of God wasn't a secret to be discovered, but a truth to be recovered? The account in Genesis feels like the final, sanitized chapter of a much larger, darker story. A story that was deliberately cut short. The question is why? What was so dangerous about the full account that later scribes felt compelled to reduce it to a mere whisper? What did they fear you would understand if you knew the name the rest of the ancient world used for these fallen beings? Because when you place the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki next to the biblical description of the Watchers, the parallels are too precise to be a coincidence. It suggests a shared memory of a single, world-altering event. And the key that unlocks this entire mystery, the proof that they are one and the same, was hidden in plain sight, in a concept the ancient scribes tried, but failed, to completely erase. To understand what was removed, we must look to the books that were silenced. The puzzle pieces aren't lost. They were simply set aside, deemed too dangerous for the unprepared. The most detailed of these is the Book of Enoch, a text once so revered that it is quoted in the New Testament book of Jude. For centuries it was a ghost, a forgotten echo, until copies were rediscovered, preserved for millennia in the ancient churches of Ethiopia. And what Enoch reveals is breathtaking. It pulls back the curtain on Genesis chapter 6, transforming 4 cryptic verses into a sweeping, tragic epic. It names the leaders of the fallen angels Semyaza, Azazel, and describes their solemn pact on the summit of Mount Hermon to descend and take human wives. Imagine that moment, a celestial rebellion, not of pride in heaven, but of lust for the daughters of earth. A conscious choice to abandon the light and walk among the dust, bringing with them secrets that humanity was never meant to know. The book details the forbidden knowledge they taught. It wasn't just sin. It was a corruption of creation itself. Azazel taught men the art of war, how to forge swords and shields. Others taught sorcery, the reading of the stars, the secrets of the cosmos. They unveiled a shadow of God's power, twisted for their own purposes. This is the backstory Genesis omits, a world not just falling into sin, but being actively and systematically poisoned by divine knowledge from a dark source. A world drowning in a deluge of forbidden wisdom long before the waters of the flood ever came. This detailed account was known to the early church. They read it. They cited it. So why was it eventually excluded? Because it revealed a truth so profound it could be easily misunderstood. The Book of Enoch gives us the story, the names, and the crimes of these celestial beings. But another ancient record from a completely different culture gives us the name of the earthly kingdom they built, and that name changes everything. Now let us connect the threads. The Sumerian tablets, baked in the Mesopotamian sun thousands of years ago, speak of powerful beings who descended from the heavens and established the first kingdoms on earth. They called them the Anunnaki. They built the first cities, like Eridu, and gave humanity the gifts of civilization, law, writing, agriculture. To the Sumerians, these were their gods. But what if this wasn't mythology? What if it was history, recorded by a people who did not understand the difference between a fallen angel and a true god? What if Anunnaki was simply the name they gave to the Watchers from Enoch's account? Think about what this means. The pre-flood world wasn't just a collection of sinful tribes. It was an organized, global civilization ruled directly by these fallen celestial beings. The Sumerian king list, an ancient text, names rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the flood. Names like Alulim and Alaljar. These are not human lifespans. They are the lifespans of beings who were never meant to die. This was the kingdom of the Watchers on earth, a dark mirror of the kingdom of heaven, built on forbidden knowledge and the corruption of God's creation. The spiritual danger of this truth becomes terrifyingly clear. When the Hebrew scribes compiled the scriptures, they were surrounded by nations like Babylon and Assyria who actively worshipped these Anunnaki. To reveal that the sons of God from their own sacred history were the very same gods their pagan neighbors bowed down to was a risk they could not take. It could have blurred the line between the one true God and the fallen pretenders. So they made a choice. They severed the connection. They removed the names and the details of this shadow kingdom to protect the faith of Israel from the poison of idolatry. They left only the cryptic warning in Genesis chapter 6, a sealed testimony for a future generation that would be strong enough to understand. But God was never blind to this dark dominion. He watched as this counterfeit kingdom spread across the face of the earth. He saw the Nephilim, the giant offspring of this unholy union, fill the world with violence. Every law given, every secret taught was a rebellion against heaven's authority. This wasn't just human sin. It was a direct challenge to the throne of God, and his response would not be a simple correction. It would be a complete reset. The flood was not just a punishment for humanity's wickedness. It was an act of divine warfare to reclaim a world stolen by fallen angels. The waters rose to wipe their kingdom from memory. But what if a piece of their power, a remnant of their forbidden knowledge, was designed to survive the very destruction God sent to erase it? This is where the story you were told in Sunday school collides with the truth that was deliberately hidden. The traditional narrative is simple. Humanity became wicked, so God sent a flood. It is a story of human sin and divine judgment. But the hidden version is far more terrifying. It is a story of cosmic rebellion, of a shadow kingdom on earth, and of a divine war fought to reclaim a world that had been stolen. The wickedness wasn't just human. It was an infection, a corruption injected into our world by beings of immense power. So why was this connection severed? Why was the name Anunnaki scrubbed from our spiritual history, leaving only the ghost of the sons of God? The answer is fear. A righteous fear, perhaps, but a fear that led to silence. Imagine the early leaders of the faith, men who gathered in councils to decide which texts would form our Bible. They looked out at a world steeped in the worship of Marduk, of Baal, of gods who were direct descendants of the Anunnaki pantheon. To them, revealing that the beings in their own sacred history were the foundation for these pagan gods was a risk too great to take. The decision was made. A calculated silence. Books like Enoch, which told the full, terrifying story, were set aside. They were deemed too dangerous, too easily misinterpreted by a young church. The gatekeepers of doctrine feared the flock would stray, unable to distinguish between the fallen angels of Genesis and the false gods of Babylon. So they chose protection over revelation. They left us a simplified story, a warning without the full context, believing they were preserving the purity of the faith. They buried one truth to protect a greater one. But in their effort to protect, they created a mystery that has haunted believers for centuries. They cut the root, but the shadow of the tree remained. They didn't realize that God, in His wisdom, preserved these truths for a generation that would be ready to understand, a generation that could see the connection without falling into idolatry. The evidence they tried to erase was not destroyed, only hidden, and the flood, the very instrument of that erasure, may not have been the final word. Because what if the most dangerous secret of the Watchers was not their knowledge, but their legacy, a legacy designed to outlast the flood itself? The flood was meant to be a final, cleansing fire of water, a divine reset button for creation. We are taught that it wiped the slate clean, that only Noah, his family, and the creatures in the ark survived to begin the world anew. But that is not the whole story. And there is something that almost no one dares to say. What if the flood failed to destroy everything? What if the Watchers, these master strategists of spiritual warfare, had a contingency plan? They knew their time was short. They saw the storm gathering. They understood that their physical kingdom on earth was doomed. But their goal was never just about earthly rule. It was about corrupting the seed, the bloodline of man, the very lineage from which the Messiah would one day come. To truly win, they only needed one thing to survive the waters: their own corrupting legacy, a seed of darkness planted to sprout in the new world. If you find this exploration of hidden biblical truths is strengthening your own walk with God, consider subscribing to our channel so you are sure not to miss the revelations we are about to uncover together. But this isn't the most shocking revelation. The ancient scribes, in their effort to erase the Anunnaki connection, left behind a second, even more terrifying mystery. They left clues, not just about who these beings were before the flood, but about how their influence reappeared after Dennet. It's a detail hidden in plain sight, a question so profound it can shake the foundations of what we think we know about the world of Abraham, Moses, and David. The waters receded, the rainbow appeared in the sky, and a new world began. But it was not a pure world, because a shadow had crossed over from the age of giants. The question that changes everything is not what was destroyed by the flood, but what was preserved in spite of it. How did the giants, the very reason for the flood, reappear in the land of Canaan centuries later? Where did Goliath and the sons of Anak come from, if all their ancestors were drowned? The answer was not lost. It was hidden, and it points to a secret that survived within the ark itself. This is the theological heart of the entire mystery. This is where the story of fallen angels and forgotten kingdoms ceases to be ancient history and becomes intensely personal. It becomes our story. Because humanity was never a bystander in this cosmic war, we were the battlefield. We were the prize. The rebellion of the Watchers was not just against God in heaven. It was an assault on the image of God dwelling on earth, within us. Think of it. Why would celestial beings, beings of light and power, risk everything for the daughters of men? Because they sought to corrupt the one thing they could never possess, the divine spark placed in humanity. They offered forbidden knowledge to make us like gods, but their true aim was to deface the very thing that already made us sons and daughters of the Most High. Every action they took was designed to sever the bloodline, to poison the well from which the promised Redeemer would one day come. This is the sacred drama that unfolds behind the veil of history. Understanding this hidden war does not shatter your faith, it fortifies it. It reveals the true scale of the darkness that God has been holding back since the dawn of time. It shows us that the story of the Bible is not just a series of disconnected events, but one continuous, unbroken narrative of God's relentless plan of redemption against an enemy far older and more cunning than we ever imagined. Seeing the enemy's oldest strategy makes the victory won at the cross shine with an even more profound and brilliant light. And God, in His infinite wisdom, did not allow this ancient corruption to go unchecked. His plan was perfect. The flood was a necessary act of judgment, but it was also an act of preservation. He chose a righteous man, Noah, to carry the seed of humanity forward. But the Bible is devastatingly honest. It tells us that even the righteous are not perfect. The secret to how the giants returned, how the shadow of the Anunnaki fell upon the new world, was not a monster that stowed away in the ark. It was a memory, a legacy, a spiritual contamination carried silently in the bloodline of one of Noah's own sons. The secret was never in a monster that hid from the flood. The secret was in the man who walked off the ark. The Bible tells us of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Japheth, and Ham. And in Genesis chapter 9, we read of a shameful event. Noah lies uncovered in his tent, and his son Ham commits a transgression against him, so grievous that a curse is pronounced, not on Ham, but on his son Canaan. For centuries, this has been read as a story of familial disrespect. But what if it was something more? What if Ham, through his wife, or through a spiritual failing of his own, carried the dormant genetic or spiritual echo of the pre-flood corruption? His act was not just dishonor, it was the moment the gate was reopened. The curse on Canaan was a prophetic seal, marking the land that would once again become the domain of giants. Suddenly, the Old Testament snaps into terrifying focus. The command for Israel to utterly destroy the inhabitants of Canaan, every man, woman, and child, was not an act of random cruelty. It was a continuation of the holy war that began with the flood. God was commanding a surgical removal of a recurring cancer, the Nephilim bloodline, that had taken root once more in the Promised Land. Goliath, the sons of Anak, the giants that made the Israelite spies feel like grasshoppers. They were not a new phenomenon. They were the children of the Old Kingdom, the shadow of the Anunnaki, risen from the ashes of the drowned world through the line of Ham. This is the hidden war that rages from Genesis to Revelation, a war over bloodlines. The enemy's singular goal from the moment the Watchers descended was to corrupt the line of man to prevent the birth of the promised seed, the Messiah who would crush the serpent's head. Every giant that stood against Israel, every false god erected in Babylon, was a spiritual barrier thrown up to stop the coming of Christ. The entire biblical narrative becomes the story of God's divine protection over one single sacred lineage, preserving it from an ancient, relentless, and supernatural enemy. This is the truth the ancient scribes protected you from. Not to deceive, but because the scale of the war was too vast to comprehend, without the final piece of the puzzle. That final piece is not a lost book or a hidden tablet. It is a person. The war against the seed of man finds its ultimate answer in the Son of Man. The victory that the flood could not complete, that the sword of Joshua could not finish, was accomplished in silence on a wooden cross. Jesus Christ, born of a pure lineage kept safe by God through millennia of spiritual warfare, shed his blood to cleanse a corruption that had haunted humanity since the beginning. The shadow of the Anunnaki, the legacy of the Watchers, is broken not by water but by blood, the blood of the Lamb. If this revelation has opened your eyes to the true depth of God's plan, share this video, and let this forgotten truth strengthen the faith of those who are ready to see the war that was won for them. Suddenly, the Bible is no longer a collection of disconnected stories. It becomes one seamless, epic saga of a war that began before time. Every law, every prophecy, every battle, from Genesis to Revelation, is a move and counter-move in this divine conflict. God's plan was never just a response to human failure. It was a proactive, relentless campaign to reclaim his creation from an ancient celestial enemy. This hidden history reveals a God far more engaged in a cosmic struggle than we have been led to believe, and the depth of his love is shown not just in forgiveness, but in his fierce, unwavering protection of the human family. There is a reason this truth is coming to light now, in our time. For generations, perhaps this knowledge was sealed because the faith of many was not ready to bear its weight. But you, the one who has always felt that there was more to the story, who has searched for answers beyond the surface, you are part of a generation being called to a deeper understanding. In an age of distraction and shallow faith, God is entrusting these profound truths to those with ears to hear. This is not a conspiracy theory, it is a sacred inheritance, a piece of the story that was preserved for those who would not be shaken, but strengthened by it. This revelation stands in stark contrast to the comfortable, simplified faith so often taught today. We are offered a gospel of personal benefit, but are rarely reminded that we were born onto a battlefield. This ancient war explains the pervasive, intelligent evil we see in the world, an evil that is more than just human weakness. The same spirit of the Watchers, who sought to corrupt humanity with forbidden knowledge and twisted appetites, is still at work. It whispers that we can be our own gods, that truth is relative, and that God's laws are chains to be broken. The enemy has not changed his strategy, only his disguise. To understand this is to be armed. This is not knowledge that should lead to fear, but to a vigilant and sober faith. It calls us to look beyond the veil of the visible world and recognize the spiritual realities that shape our lives. The war for the bloodline of humanity was won at the cross, but the battle for the hearts and minds of humanity rages on. Seeing the enemy's ancient playbook is the first step to standing firm against his modern schemes, armed with the truth that was hidden for ages, but is now, finally, being revealed. Take a moment. Let the weight of this revelation settle in your spirit. The story of our faith is not a simple tale for children. It is a cosmic epic, a story of war and redemption fought across millennia. For centuries, these truths were hidden, sealed away by men who feared they were too overwhelming. But now, in these times, the seals are being broken, and the full, breathtaking scope of God's plan is coming to light. You were not led here by accident. You were led here to understand the true depth of the battle that was won for you. The victory on the cross was not simply a pardon for sin. It was the final, decisive blow in a war that began when the Watchers first descended from the heavens. It was the cleansing of a corruption so ancient, it predated the flood. Christ's blood did what the waters of Noah could not. It washed the shadow of the Anunnaki from the human soul forever, reclaiming the bloodline of Adam for God. This knowledge does not weaken faith. It makes it unshakable, built on the rock of a God who fought for you long before you were ever born. If this truth burns in your heart, if it feels like a missing piece of your spirit has finally been returned, then leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. This is a journey we are on together, and you will not want to miss what is revealed next. And now we have a members area. By becoming a member, you bless this work and help us to continue producing edifying and revealing content like this, shining a light on the truths that have been kept in darkness for too long. Let us see how far this revelation is traveling. In the comments below, write where you are watching from, so that we may all see how far this ancient, powerful truth is reaching hearts across the nation and around the world. Know that you are not alone in this search. The family of those who seek is growing. Until next time, may you walk in the light of the truth you have found.